Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this another program of 40-second comprehensive course on echo. Today, we are going to talk on aortic stenosis and pulmonic stenosis. I'll try to make it as simple as possible today so that you should be able to know how to evaluate aortic stenosis and what are the varieties of aortic stenosis are. Moving on to my next slide, why we need to assess aortic stenosis, how to assess it, what are the pitfalls, then concomitant lesions are indication. We are not going to talk in this session. We are going to talk in subsequent session, one after 2 weeks. Let's see why we need to assess aortic stenosis properly. If you look at this slide, which is almost 15-year-old, the onset of symptoms led to sudden deterioration in the survival rate. Like the person who develops effort angina, syncope, or dyspnea, the survival rate dramatically dips down, as you can see in the slides. And that is the reason that we need to assess aortic stenosis as long as the symptoms have not appeared. We have to pick up these people when they are asymptomatic. Second, survival in asymptomatic aortic stenosis. Look at the event-free survival. Even if his aortic stenosis is present, and if we do not pick them up and don't take them for surgery, their cumulative survival gradually decreases over a period of time. This is an indication for almost 5 years data, which says almost 50% people will not reach at the end of 5 years. Then event-free survival, Doppler gradient. And this is the most important slide we'd like to show or share with you. If you have a Doppler gradient of less than 3 meters per second versus a Doppler gradient of more than 4 meters per second, this is V max, that is maximum gradient, not the mean gradient. So higher the mean peak gradient, worst is the survival of these cases. Mean to say again, as we are going to discuss, more than 4 meters per second means severe aortic stenosis. And these people, if we do not pick them up and don't take them for surgery, obviously the survival is poor. Then survival based on New York Heart Association class. As they go higher in the stage, the worst is the survival. It's a repetition of the previous slide. When the symptomatology develops, if they go to NHYA 3 or 4, the survival diminishes significantly. And that is the reason we need to look at these people at a much earlier stage. What we are going to talk? We are going to talk of all this. Let's take one by one. This is the most important slide for any aortic stenosis which is present for last 2 decades. And if you happen to look at this aortic slide, stenosis evaluation slide, what is the most important thing in this slide is the 2 dimensions and Doppler data. And these 2 dimensions Doppler data, they're adequate for diagnosis as well as subsequent treatment. And this slide was presented by Mayo Clinic almost in 2000 years. So it's more than 20-year-old, and they still talk of this kind of a thing. When we talk of morphology, then we talk of a gradient, cardiac output, and an aortic valve area. Of course, the cardiac output to a large extent has been modified to stroke volume as well as transvalvular flow rate. Let's take one by one. So what are the modalities for evaluations? We are going to see M mode, 2 dimensions data, Doppler data and equations. That is the most important thing for any evaluation of aortic stenosis as on today. And when we are in a fix that we cannot make a certain diagnosis, we go on to have a 3 dimensions transthoracic versus transesophageal area, dobutamine echo, 2 dimension stain, and obviously cardiac catheterization. And one more thing which is left over here today, if we talk of it, is a CT score of the coronary vessels or CT scan score for overall calcification. Let's look at the M-mode, thickened cusp, eccentric closure line, calcification, reduced cusp separation. They're historical. If we are going to look at these kind of a thing, they suggest that possibly the patient has got some amount of a stenosis. Look at this is the normal box with a central closure line. This is the right coronary cusp. This is the non-coronary cusp. And if you have an eccentric closure line, it means the patient has got a bicuspid aortic valve. Then we go on to see these kind of a thing in 2 dimensions data, which tells us today. I'm trying to show you these slides if you happen to look at them, but we hardly spend time on these kind of a data today. Exactly what we look at aorta dimensions, we look at LA dimensions, and it's really, we look at these thickened valves with eccentric closure lines. Then comes systolic doming, which is really, really useful. Look at this patient out here. If you happen to concentrate over here, you can see that this valve leaflet is doming during systole when it's opening towards aorta. Here is LVOT, here is aorta. And when it's put on a color on this, you see some amount of a turbulence towards a forward flow, and some regurgitation is also present in a reverse direction towards LVOT. That tells you that possibly patient has got a stenosis, but it can't tell you about a severity of a stenosis. Now, this is a zoomed up view where you can see a doming and thickening of aortic valve leaflets. We can look at these kind of a thing in infective endocarditis and 3 dimensions views also. And this is a picture of dilated aortic root. Many people must have seen, many persons must have seen this kind of a data. When long-standing bicuspid valve or aortic root dilatation secondary to hypertension in aging population, we get a turbulence forward flow and a regurgitative flow. Then comes a true bicuspid or tricuspid. We don't look at a bicuspid and tricuspid valve during the Plaque's window. We always look during the parasternal short axis view at aorta. And what cusp? Here is a left coronary cusp, here is a right coronary cusp, here is a non-coronary cusp. And we can see the left coronary artery, we can see the right coronary artery in this. If you happen to see a 3 cusps together, like I'll try to fuse one over here, one over here, and one over here. This is tricuspid. But you can have various formation of bicuspid or tricuspid patients, presentation of these cusps. Then one more important, if the stenosis is at the level of valves, if the stenosis is at the level of valve, it is known as valvular stenosis. If the stenosis is just distal to the valves, this is known as supravalvular stenosis. If the stenosis is before the valve, it is known as subaortic stenosis. Like number of times we have got a tag or we have got a membrane in the subaortic region to produce LVOT gradient, not the aortic valve gradient. Similarly, we have some kind of a tag or membrane in the supraaortic region to give us a supravalvular aortic stenosis. In that case, what will happen? All of you will understand the turbulence will not be at the valvular level. The turbulence would be at supravalvular level, distal to the valve, or subvalvular level before the valve. Now, let's look at the presentation of these people. This is a normal tricuspid valve, this is a bicuspid valve, and this is a unicuspid valve where you can see only a single line, whole of the valve opens up. Now you can see a bicuspid valve over here. Now, most important thing comes up. This is all qualitative. We cannot say them as quantitative. Now comes the data for quantitative assessment of aortic stenosis. What all we are going to see, how to assess, and then what to assess and what to calculate. In what to assess, what do we see is, we see LVOT diameter. I'm going to show them one by one. LVOT VTI, peak and mean aortic valve gradient from 6 different windows. Aortic valve VTI, ejection fraction, transvolular flow rate, acceleration time, ejection time, and AT-ET ratio, aortic valve area by planimetry in 3 dimensions echocardiography. Let's see one by one. One picture is LVOT diameter. Where do we measure the LVOT diameter? We measure the LVOT diameter at the hinge point of aortic valve. Normally, the aortic valve diameter is close to 2 centimeters. And this is the most difficult part of any aortic stenosis. Because when we look at an aortic valve diameter, both the leaflets, this right and non-cornicus, should be opened up completely. And how do we perceive this? If I go back to my picture, if this is a tricuspid valve, I have to open up a section like this. If I'm cutting a section like this, then only I'm able to see this. And if I have to say that which one is this, I have to put it upside down. If this is the left cornicus, this is the right cornicus, this is the non-cornicus, this section goes upside down because we are looking at right cornicus and a non-cornicus. Our interaction of this section would be like this in this plaques window. And whenever we have this plaques window, we should be able to see a right cornicus leaflet and non-cornicus leaflet. And whenever see with this, then we see the aortic valve at the hinge point of right cornicus and non-cornicus. And this is what the reason is. If we do not have a proper cut section, we'll not be having a proper idea of LVOT diameter. And any reduction in size, like suppose it's 2 centimeters, if it goes down to 1.8 centimeter, we'll be underestimating aortic valve area. Similarly, if goes then more than 2 centimeter to 2.2, we'll be overestimating the aortic valve area. So first is LVOT diameter in plaques window. Second is LVOT VTI. How do we measure LVOT VTI? We go to apical 5-chamber view, or we can go to apical 3-chamber view to put a cursor before the aortic valve leaflets. If we insert the cursor into the aortic valve leaflet, it will become aortic valve VTI. What we are looking forward is LVOT VTI. And when we put a sample volume in LVOT VTI, what we get? We get a Doppler flow pattern like this. And if you trace this Doppler flow pattern, what we get is a LVOT VTI. Next is peak and mean gradient. This is the most important thing for any aortic stenosis. What do we do? When we are in 3-chamber view or a 5-chamber view, if you're putting a sample volume at this point, it'll be LVOT VTI. Then we cross the sample volume across the aortic valve where the turbulence is present. Then what we look at as a Doppler flow, which cannot be contained by a pulse Doppler because it's a high velocity flow. We switch on to continuous wave Doppler to see the flow pattern in this fashion. And look at this Doppler flow over here. This has got a forward systolic flow. This is a reversal flow. And you have to look at this Doppler flow pattern, which is absolutely clear. If the Doppler flow pattern is not clear, like it's not clear over here, not clear over here, not clear over here, we'll be under or overestimating the Doppler flow pattern. When we measure this Doppler flow pattern, then once we acquire this Doppler flow pattern, then we planimetrize it along with this modal velocity. What is the modal velocity? As Dr. Parashar said last time, we trace the highest illuminated point or hyperechoic point of this patterns. So whenever we trace this pattern, what we get is a modal velocity, and then we get a peak velocity, we get a mean velocity, peak gradient, and a mean gradient along with aortic valve VTI. So one pattern will give you aortic valve VTI along with peak and mean velocity and gradient. Now the question happens, aortic valve is a tri-leaflet valve. So we have to measure this aortic valve gradient, peak and mean, velocity and gradient, and VTI in 5 different windows for aortic stenosis. And then we utilize wherever the maximum velocity is or maximum gradient is, we use that particular velocity or a pattern. Similarly, that was 3-chamber view, and this is a suprasternal window where we are looking a forward flow velocity, and the same patient has got a different kind of flow velocity in this patient. Look, this is 4 meters per second, same patient. And when we did in the 3-chamber view, it was only 2.9 meters per second. And this is dependent on the flow across which we are interrogating, and depending on which cusp of the aortic valve is more thickened or stenotic. So we look at the 5 different window, and what we say this 5 different window in our setup is we look at 3-chamber view, we look at a 5-chamber view, we look at a right parasternal window, we look at a suprasternal window, we look at a subcostal window, and then we devised another window which is known as JROP, right anterior oblique window, is where we put a pillow behind a patient's shoulder. In suprasternal window, we're putting a pillow behind both the shoulders. In right anterior oblique view, we are just putting a pillow behind the right shoulder alone, so that the right shoulder is tilted like this up and the neck is being extended, and then we put a suprasternal, this right anterior oblique view. And believe my words, number of times we got much better gradient as compared to the rest of the windows. But another view, which is very, very important for aortic stenosis, is always look at the right parasternal window to assess severe aortic stenosis gradient. And it's not the average. You have to take the whatever the maximum gradients are across that window. So what we looked at LVOT VTI, we looked at LVOT diameter, then we look at the peak and mean velocity and gradients across aortic valve and aortic valve VTI. Then comes the ejection fraction for these people. Look, it's very important to look at an ejection fraction for these subset of populations. And it's not the eyeballing this time. We have to really carefully measure the true ejection fraction, at least in biplane method. If it's not in triplane or a global ejection fraction, we utilize 4-chamber view and a 2-chamber view together to calculate ejection fraction by manually or automatically if some machine is present. And this is more than 54 in females, more than 52 in males. This is what the guideline says. But in aortic stenosis, what the guideline says, anything above 50 is normal, anything less than 50 is abnormal. But they are going to be get modified, because what we have learned over a period of last 2 to 3 years, if the ejection fraction is fallen down to less than not 50, the ejection fraction has fallen down to less than 59. In those cases, we try to say that LV dysfunction has started happening in these subset of populations. Next comes stroke volume. And how do you look for a stroke volume is, again, we look at an LVOT diameter, LVOT VTI, diameter in Planck's window, LVOT VTI in 3-chamber or 5-chamber view, wherever it is, and then we calculate the stroke volume. And it's very simple. LVOT diameter, this is LVOT diameter, divided by 2, square of this will become pi r square, into 3.14, that is pi, into LVOT VTI. Here we get the LVOT VTI. Next comes aortic ejection time and acceleration time. And the very simple way of looking at this ejection and acceleration time is, we look at the how much time it took for accelerating to peak and how much time it took to finish the complete ejection. So that's what acceleration time and ejection time will take in aortic valve gradients. Then comes transvalvular flow rate, that is the ratio of stroke volume to ejection time. So if we are looking at a stroke volume, then we are looking at ejection time, and we are able to get a transvalvular flow rate in these subset of populations. And last is, if we cannot look at an aortic valve area by a content equation properly, we always go transesophageally to look at aortic valve area by planimetry. You can ask me a question right now. Why can't we do it in transthoracic? Why transesophageal? If you have a good picture, obviously it's possible, but majority of data which has collaborated with aortic valve area, calculated aortic valve area by planimetry is by transesophageal, not by a transthoracic. Then on basis of this, what all to calculate, because this is what we are going to calculate on the basis of all this. We calculate stroke volume. Let's look at the stroke volume in this patient. We have a 1.66 as a LVOT diameter. We have 22.99 LVOT VTI. So what will be 1.69 has been converted to 1.70 for a better ejection calculations. 1.70 divided by 2, square of that would be r square. Diameter divided by 2 will become radius. Radius square of this multiplied by 3.14 into LVOT VTI, that is 22.99 centimeters. And it gives rise to a value of 52.16 ml of a stroke volume in this patient. I hope that will be simple for you to look at these kind of things. But the stroke volume has to be either a direct stroke volume or it has to be index stroke volume. Considering a body surface area of 1.7, that is what we assume is. Otherwise, you can feed height and weight into your machine to get your body surface area. Considering a body surface area of 1.7, 52 divided by 1.7 gives you a stroke volume of 30.68 ml per meter body surface area. That is indexed stroke volume in this patient, which is less than 35 ml. Normal is more than 35 ml to talk of normal flow. If it's less than 35 ml, that is known as low flow of a stroke volume. Next comes the most important thing is aortic valve area. Aortic valve area is what is the flow across any structure, that's area into velocity. And if I have to look at this area into velocity, and how do we get the area and velocity is, there are two parameters which are important in this patient. One is a LVOT diameter. Second is LVOT VTI. So we have got both LVOT diameter and LVOT VTI. On the other hand, we have got only aortic valve VTI. So we can calculate aortic valve area. So area at LVOT into a TVI or a VTI across LVOT is equivalent to area across aortic valve into TVI across aortic valve. The word is TVI over here. It could be VTI or TVI. Again, a slide from Mayo Clinic. So if we have an LVOT area, which we calculated as diameter divided by 2, square of that into 3.14, and that is LVOT VTI. If you look at this picture, this is stroke volume across LVOT. If we divide this stroke volume with aortic valve VTI, what we are going to get is aortic valve area. So in this picture, the most important parameter is LVOT VTI, because LVOT area is the most important part in this picture. So whatever the area at LVOT and whatever is LVOT VTI, the amount of blood which is flowing through it is the stroke volume. The same stroke volume, the flow has to go across the aortic valve. We can calculate VTI by continuous wave Doppler across aortic valve, and utilizing that continuity equation where aortic valve area is LVOT area into LVOT VTI divided by aortic valve VTI. And this picture, looking at this picture is...
Excuse me, Dr. Gupta, can you repeat the previous slide once again?
Yeah, I'm repeating this previous slide. LVOT diameter is 2.2 centimeters. Okay. Then what is 2.2 is LVOT diameter into 0.8785 into 18 and divided by 1. So this is a little modification. Let me go back and repeat this slide previously. Whatever the blood which is flowing through LVOT has to flow across aortic valve. If I calculate the LVOT area and we can calculate the LVOT VTI. So this become a stroke volume across LVOT. On the other hand, the same blood flows across the aortic valve. In aortic valve, we have got aortic valve VTI. So if we have aortic valve VTI, which is derived by continuous wave Doppler across aortic valve, we can calculate the aortic valve area. I hope that will be clear with you. Now I'll try to show you some example for this in a couple of minutes. Give me some time. Here is LVOT diameter is 2.2 and LVOT VTI is 18. Aortic valve VTI is 103 continuous wave Doppler. So if I use this equation of 2.2 divided by 2 will be 1.1. 1.1 square of 1.1 into 3.14, that is pi. Pi r square into LVOT VTI, that is 18. If I divide this figure from 103 of aortic valve VTI, we'll get aortic valve area, which is a 0.66 centimeter in this patient. We'll be coming back to this picture again and again, but the most important thing which I like to emphasize is it's very easy to calculate LVOT VTI. It's very easy to calculate aortic valve VTI, but it's very difficult to calculate LVOT diameter, because everything depends on LVOT diameter to give us a precise aortic valve area by continuity equation. This is what is normal is anything more than 2 centimeters square. Mild is 1.5, moderate is 1, severe is 0.75. But after 2018, what we talk is anything more than 1 is considered as progressive aortic stenosis. Anything less than 1 is considered as severe aortic stenosis. So we say why we divided all these things. We divided all these things because the reason anything less than 1 centimeter by continuity equation, we call them as severe aortic stenosis and need interventions. Then if we divide this aortic valve area by body surface area, then aortic valve area will become indexed area. And any area more less than 0.6 centimeters square is considered as severe aortic stenosis. One more parameter in this same patient is you forget about area or LVOT diameter. You look at LVOT VTI, you look at aortic valve VTI, LVOT VTI divided by aortic valve VTI, if this is known as dimensionless index, if it's less than 0.25 is considered again as severe aortic stenosis. I hope I'm not confusing you too much, because if you happen to look what all parameters you need is, you need an LVOT diameter, you need LVOT VTI, and in 3-chamber view or 5-chamber view, you switch on from pulse to continuous wave Doppler, you get peak and mean velocity, peak and mean gradients, and aortic valve VTI. So 3 measurements will give you everything almost in aortic stenosis. The stroke volume, the aortic valve area by continuity equation, then LVOT VTI, aortic valve VTI, and a dimensionless index. Moving on further, this is what is important today. I'm sure many people would not try to listen these kind of a thing today. But when we are talking of aortic stenosis today is we always look at a transvalvular flow rate, that is the ratio of stroke volume to ejection time. Look, the stroke volume in that patient was 52 ml. Ejection time was 280 milliseconds. 52 divided by 0.28 seconds will give you an ejection transvalvular flow rate of more than 185 ml per second. This is millisecond. That's why this figure appears to be in larger one, 185 ml per second. I'll show you what is the importance of all these things when I'm talking of their significance. Here comes acceleration time. Here comes the ejection time. So we look at both acceleration and ejection time. What is their significances? If I to summarize, the most important thing in aortic stenosis is the Doppler gradients. And in this Doppler gradients, we look at a peak velocity, we look at a mean gradients, we look at a continuity equation by aortic valve area, and that's how we look at the severe aortic stenosis. If I have to put them all these things together, the aortic valve area by continuity equation less than 1 centimeter square, indexed aortic valve area less than 0.6 centimeter square, peak velocity more than 4 meters per second, mean gradient more than 40 millimeters of mercury, dimensionless index less than 0.25, stroke volume more than 35 ml per meter square, then transvalvular flow rate as 242 ml per second. So these are all things put together, and then we say this patient is being classified into severe aortic stenosis. And the same thing is repeated out here, and with the more emphasis that we should look at the aortic valve gradient in all 6 windows when we are evaluating their severity. And that's why whenever you look at aortic valve stenosis, we spend more time because we need more time for the evaluation. We need more time to look at LVOT VTI. We need more time to calculate LVOT diameter. Even after practicing almost for 16 plus 20 years of echocardiography, it takes longer time to calculate LVOT VTI or LVOT diameter than it was before. Then what are the pitfalls? Because whenever you have these kind of abnormalities, there has to be a sure pitfall. And whatever is written over here, I'll say one important thing which is very, very important is whenever we look at this aortic valve LVOT diameter, that is the most important point of any over and underestimation. Second, look at the Doppler gradient across aortic valve. We have to spend time in at least 6 windows to get the maximum possible gradients. This patients cannot be done in a hurry. So any coexisting AR, what will happen with coexisting AR? More blood will flow back into the aortic valve. We have a chances of having overestimation of the aortic valve. Subaortic membrane, it will mingle with aortic stenosis. Then accidentally measuring the mitral regurgitation. Then next comes high output states. High output state is like whenever we have a thyrotoxic beriberi and other things where we have these kind of a thing. Sometimes ectopic beat is present and we look at these kind of a thing during ectopic beat. Looks because after ectopic beat, the pause is there. And after the pause, you find better gradient or bigger gradients. We should not use that. Then non-representative sampling in aortic atrial fibrillation. We have got an answer now with this. During atrial fibrillation, we look at the longest possible pause to calculate for aortic stenosis. But in these two fashions, where a lot of PVCs are present or the atrial fibrillation is present, the best answer is to do a planimetry. Then underestimation, we do not have an excellent Doppler signals. The jet is eccentric. We are not parallel to the flow, and poor expertise. This is very important because if we do not have a good expertise for echocardiography, we always over or underestimate our Doppler signals. In our job experience, improper evaluation, not utilizing all 6 windows. And we have missed many patients who were respiratory patients. We cannot do a really good evaluation in respiratory patients because of their poor echo windows. Then Doppler angle evaluation, another important issue. We are not parallel to the Doppler flow and we underestimate these people. And I can quote my own mistake. When one of my patients who was having a chronic respiratory problem, he used to come back again and again with breathlessness. And the best part of his breathlessness was, it was a temporary transient breathlessness. And as soon as he used to reach us, he was almost normal. And on top of that, his window was not adequate. They carefully listening him, we could find a harsh systolic murmur in the left, second, third intercostal space. And that is the day when we looked that patient again and again, and we could find a good gradient very intermittently when he was holding his breath was a severe aortic stenosis. Later on, we did a transesophageal echo. And with transesophageal echo in planimetry, we could say that he was having a severe aortic stenosis. And then we got him operated for a severe aortic stenosis. And it is almost 5 years now or 6 years now that he has been doing well, does not have an episode of severe breathlessness. In fact, that breathlessness was not because of his chest condition. The breathlessness was because of his added load of effort dyspnea because of aortic stenosis. I hope I'm able to give you an answer for all this, whatever I showed you. Based on this, as on today, the most difficult part which comes in day-to-day practice. What is this difficult part is? Peak velocity, mean gradient, aortic valve area, indexed aortic valve area, indexed stroke volume. So we look at these 5 parameters. Based on this 5 parameters, there are 2 parts are there: normal flow, high gradients. What do you mean by normal flow? Index stroke volume more than 35 ml per meter square is a normal flow. High gradient more than 4 meters per second in a mean gradient of 40 millimeters of mercury. Now the aortic valve area is constant in all patients. Here, normal flow, high gradient, normal flow, low gradient, aortic valve area, normal flow, low flow, low gradient, and low flow, low gradient, a dopamine. So what is this? So we classify them in 4 different factions of these people as with of severe aortic stenosis. Normal is normal flow, high gradients. So we have a gradient of more than 4 meters per second, but flow is normal. Now here's a normal flow, but low gradient. Gradients are less than 4 meters per second. Mean gradient is less than 40 meters per second. Aortic valve area is less than 1 centimeter square by continuity equation. But the stroke volume is normal, but you look at these gradients, they are poor. On the contrary, we have a low flow, low gradient paradoxical aortic stenosis. Look what exactly happened. This flow of more than 35 ml has become less now. So gradients are less and aortic valve area is less, but the flow has also reduced. That is known as paradoxical aortic stenosis. Only fact in this is here, low flow, low gradient aortic stenosis. It could be both low flow, low gradient aortic stenosis. Here the ejection fraction is normal or preserved. Here the ejection fraction is reduced, and that's why we have to differentiate between low flow, low gradient paradoxical and low flow, low gradient with reduced ejection fractions. So EF comes into handy over here and differentiate between normal ejection fraction versus poor ejection fractions. As I said a couple of minutes back, whenever we have a problems, the best answer comes with aortic valve area by planimetry. And here is a transthoracic picture, which is very good transthoracic picture to show you an aortic valve area. And here the aortic valve area is 3.6 centimeters square by planimetry. With the onset of machine, this has become really possible. Otherwise, previous machine, it was not possible to calculate aortic valve area by planimetry. And if you do not have a transthoracic echo picture, you can go ahead and do a transesophageal echo pictures. Now, how to differentiate between this low flow, low gradient aortic stenosis with poor LV systolic function? This is true or pseudo. We subject these people to low dose dobutamine echocardiography. If this ejection, if the aortic stenosis is really severe, what will happen? With the low dose of a dobutamine, the gradients will increase, the aortic value will remain the same or decreases. On the contrary, if it's not true or a pseudo severe or pseudo aortic stenosis, both the gradients will increase as well as the aortic valve area will increase. And now you can ask me a question, how do you say the area has increased? How do you say the gradient increase? With low dose dobutamine, we'll be acquiring all 3 things together. We'll be looking at what? LVOT diameter will remain constant. Suppose it's 2. If you give a dobutamine echo, if it's a true aortic stenosis, the gradient which was low like 23 of 25 will go more than 40 millimeters of mercury, mean gradients, and a peak grade velocity will go to more than 4 meters per second. And utilize a continuity equation, we'll have aortic well area which will be less. On the contrary, if a pseudo aortic stenosis, severe aortic stenosis, then gradients will also go up, and by continuity equation, the aortic well area will also go up. And that's how we differentiate these people of low flow, low gradient, reduced ejection fraction by dobutamine echo. And we do a low dose dobutamine echo. It's not a high dose. What do you mean by low dose dobutamine echo? We try to stimulate only their beta cells, like we go to 5 to less than 10 micrograms per kg body weight per minute. And we start with 2.5, gradually go to 5 after 3 minutes, then 7.5, and then 10 mics per kg body weight to assess the severity of aortic stenosis. So this is an example where LVOT diameter is remain constant is 2. LVOT VTI is 18. Aortic well ejection time, forget about you at this time, is with dobutamine echo peak, the LVOT VTI has gone from 18 to 33 and aortic well VTI has gone to 85. And these things have increased dramatically, telling you whether this is true or pseudo aortic stenosis. Last, in assessment, what is the problem again in this people of a low grade, normal flow, low grade flow, low gradient paradoxical aortic stenosis? Why their flow is low despite normal ejection fraction? And a lot of emphasis has been put on assessing a two-dimensional strain in this subset of populations. Normally their LV dysfunction subclinically has set in, and that is being detected by GLS or global longitudinal strain of aortic stenosis. And that's how we look at possible intrinsic myocardial dysfunction leading to low flow, low gradient, severe aortic stenosis with normal LV systolic function or preserved LV systolic function or normal LV systolic function in these subset of population, saying that their effective ejection fraction is normal, but they have a subclinical LV dysfunction. And this is the basis possibly today is when we started talking of ejection fraction not as less than 50% as a cutoff, we're talking of ejection fraction as 59% of a cutoff to talk about normal ejection fraction in aortic stenosis. This is a patient where you can see that LV function appears to be reasonably normal, but the GLS in this patient is average GLS is only 14.8% in this patient. So calculating ejection fraction, if you calculate, it will be roughly like whatever it is, the cutoff mark has gone to 59%, and this will be little less than 59%. But if you take a cutoff mark as 50% or 52%, this is have almost a normal ejection fractions. Little bit about transesophageal echocardiography. This is what the picture of a transesophageal echocardiography. As I said earlier, this is better evaluation of a transesophageal echocardiography is when we planimetrize this aortic valve area in transesophageal echo. Whenever we have a doubt, we try to do a planimetry by transesophageal echocardiography, or we utilize a calcium scoring. Anything more than 1500 calcium scoring is considered as significant calcium scoring for these kind of a populations. Lot of things are happening in 3 dimensions echocardiography. I can show you a 3 dimensions echocardiography pictures where we can look at this aortic valve area in 3 dimensions. And this is a picture for a 3 dimensions echocardiography. Now you can see how beautifully we can see a 3 dimensions transesophageal live 3 dimensions echocardiography, what some people say as 4D echocardiography. We can really freeze these pictures and planimetrize the aortic valve area. It's not only the planimetrization, we can see some kind of a nodule in this particular patient which is projecting towards the LVOT. We are sitting in LVOT and looking at this aortic valve which is opening on other side. And now this is a poor LV systolic contraction with poor opening of aortic valve seen in this 3 dimensions echocardiography. So If we have a poor LV systolic functions, we do a dobutamine echo associated to significant AR, significant MR, and HOCM, which we are not going to discuss again over here. The class which is there after 2 weeks when we talk of a concomitant lesions to assess the severity of this aortic valve with other valves would be talked about. At this point, I like to stop for certain time and ask you a question before moving on. All right. So we are going to talk about now pulmonic stenosis, which is much easier than aortic stenosis. So what we look at a pulmonic stenosis per se. We look at a subpulmonic stenosis. We look at a suprapulmonic stenosis. And how do we look? Look at a parasternal short axis view at aorta. So here is an aorta. Here is a pulmonic valve. And you look before the pulmonic valve, there's some kind of a tissue which is dividing the RV. Can you see this picture over here? And this is very clearly seen in 3 dimensions window. Now compare this 2 dimensions, compare this 3 dimensions. But if you do not have a 3 dimensions imaging window, so what we do? We take a cursor at this particular point. And whenever we'll take a cursor to this particular point, the aliasing will start happening in this kind of a pictures. So this is subpulmonic stenosis. Then comes suprapulmonic. Look, here is a pulmonic valve and here is a turbulence in the suprapulmonic area. So now this is much better seen. This is pulmonic valve. Here is an obstruction in the suprapulmonic area or in pulmonic artery. That was somewhere in RVOT or RVOT. RVOT here is in pulmonic artery. Can you see the turbulence or some flow happening to this? So what we do, we keep a sample volume over here. We move the sample volume to pulmonic valve. The flow velocity only would be a 1 meter per second. But as you move this sample volume into this obstruction, the aliasing will start happening with a Doppler flow pattern. So here is a pulmonic valve, here is a suprapulmonic stenosis, and continuous wave Doppler gives you a velocity of 4 meters per second. So you have to have a very good window to talk about subpulmonic and suprapulmonic in parasternal short axis view. Now, the classical example, look, there is nothing before the pulmonic valve, there is nothing after the pulmonic valve, and the turbulence is only at the pulmonic valve level. And we have a gradient of almost 3 meters per second. And you can see the turbulence in pulmonic valve level. And that's how we look at pulmonic stenosis. Essentially a congenital disorder, carcinoid and obstructive vegetations or tumor. Assessment by transthoracic echo alone is usually sufficient for diagnosis and clinical decision making. We look at the valve anatomy, hemodynamics, hemodynamic consequences and symptoms. Valves are usually thickened, distorted, possibly calcified with systolic doming and reduced excursion. Other anatomic abnormalities such as narrowed RVOT. Valve hemodynamics more than 4 meters per second and the peak instantaneous gradient of more than 64 millimeters of mercury is considered as severe pulmonic stenosis. So this is the only valve where we do not have a mean gradients. We have the peak gradients. Any gradient more than 64 millimeters of mercury is considered as severe pulmonic stenosis. And what are the hemodynamics consequences? We'll have right ventricular hypertrophy, possibly enlargement, which is later on, much later on. And post-stenotic dilatation of the main pulmonic artery is very, very common in these subset of operations. Symptoms, almost none. It is diagnosed when we look at these people. Then next thing which is very commonly seen is peripheral pulmonary artery stenosis. What do you mean by peripheral pulmonary artery stenosis is once the pulmonary artery bifurcates, it goes to right and left pulmonary artery. And you can have this in right or left pulmonary artery in evolutions. And this is a very common phenomenon seen in infants or neonates because the pulmonary arteries have not developed because they have not developed in the initial period of the livehoods. And you present them as peripheral pulmonary artery stenosis. And look at this gradient, which is almost 2.62 meters per second, where the proximal flow velocity was only 1 meters per second. Then how to assess pulmonary stenosis? Always in parasolic short axis view at iota. And you get peak velocity by continuous wave or Doppler. Subpulmonic at the level of stenosis, you assess suprapulmonic at the level of stenosis and pulmonic at the level of stenosis. One more thing I like to say at this point is always remember these stenosis, they are very rarely they are alone. They are present with some lesions like VSD is the most common thing which is associated with pulmonic stenosis. Tetralogy of Fallot, trilogy of Fallot. So these kind of lesions are majority of time they are present with these stenotic lesions. And we do not take the mean gradient, we always take a peak gradient, and anything velocity more than 4 meters per second is considered as severe pulmonic stenosis. Nothing specific as far as pulmonic stenosis is concerned, and that's how we look at these pulmonic stenosis. One more point which I forgot to tell you. We have reported one case where the patient was idiopathic pulmonary artery hypertension or primary pulmonary artery hypertension at the age of about 48 years. When we looked at his pulmonic flow, everything was normal. But somehow we got his CT pulmonary angiogram done and we could locate bilateral pulmonary artery stenosis distally. And when we look at the bilateral pulmonary artery stenosis distally, after doing a bilateral stenting, his PA pressure came down dramatically. So my take-home message for this kind of a subject is when you happen to see a severe pulmonic stenosis, raised PA pressures, when no cause is found and you try to label them as primary pulmonary artery hypertension, always get their CT pulmonary angiogram done, or you can do a pulmonary angiogram if you are an invasive cardiologist. And in those cases, maybe you are missing some peripheral terminal pulmonic stenosis presenting as primary pulmonary artery hypertension. So with this few words, any questions anybody can ask me, I am open to answer. This is one case which we recorded in Sri Lanka. Pulmonic stenosis. And if you do an angiogram for this patient, this will be one part of RV, this will be another part of RV, and there was a small tunnel in this RV. And obviously the answer for this patient is not stenting. The answer of this patient is myomectomy. Any questions before
Sir, I had one question.